Hey everybody, and welcome back to our discussion on Chapter 18, Aging in Sports and Exercise. So what we kind of know, and is kind of a given, that as we age, our performance is going to decline. For example, if you are 20 years old and you have a certain level of performance, you wouldn't necessarily expect the exact same level of performance from, say, the same individual when they are 60. And this is because our natural tendency as we age is to become more sedentary. It becomes more difficult to perform certain amounts of physical activity, therefore we stop doing it. However, if we become completely sedentary, what's going to end up happening is an event called selective mortality. So we actually choose to make our health worse by ceasing to participate in physical activity and exercise. We know some general things are going to occur as we age. So first, our height is going to decline as we age. We start to compress the intervertebral discs, and the cushioning is going to be lost. Our spine starts to compress and shrink. Our bones start to break down, and they start to compress and shrink as well. So we actually get shorter as we age. Going with that, initially our weight is going to increase. We become more sedentary. We don't necessarily change our calorie intake, therefore we gain weight. And then what's going to end up happening is after we have this initial weight gain, we start to have weight loss. This is because as we age, our appetite becomes suppressed and we kind of just forget to eat. Next, we're going to start to see an increase in body fat percentage and a decline in our fat-free mass. So basically what's happening is even though we are losing weight overall, we are accumulating more fat and losing more muscle mass. So we're starting to get an unfavorable body composition. The other part of this is because the body fat starts to go from under the skin, being subcutaneous, and then packing itself around our viscera, so our internal organs. This is incredibly unhealthy, tends to be associated with increased risks of cardiovascular disease, liver disease, hypertension, heart attacks, and other not so great health conditions. Additionally, our bone mineral density is going to decline. We've stopped doing high impact activities as we age. Also, maybe you didn't do enough high impact activities as a child. We're not eating as much anymore, so our calcium intake starts to decline and our skeleton starts to break down. And then finally, our strength and our neuromuscular function start to decline, and we end up with just kind of a not great combination of effects. We're weak, we're not functioning very well, we have unfavorable body composition, and we don't move very well, and that leads to a very low quality of life. However, here's the cool thing. If we continue to participate in physical activity and exercise, we can prevent or at least slow down the progression and decline, or the progression of decline associated with age, as long as we continue to participate in physical activity. We have even more favorable results if we add favorable diet changes with physical activity. So here's what's going to happen. So basically, if we want to mitigate strength and function loss and improve quality of life, we have older individuals strength train. Now, this resistance training, strength training is probably going to look a little bit different than you think. So individuals that are in their 40s, 50s, and even into their 60s can absolutely do traditional strength training. They can squat and bench press and do a lot of different things. Body weight resistance training, yoga, a lot of these resistance training modalities will be very helpful for them. However, once you get over the age of 60, you start to think about some different modalities. So I give you a good example here. For example, my dad is 60 years old. He participates in 3 different softball leagues, lifts really heavy 4 days a week, super fit. Strength training is not a problem for him. However, if you were to take, say, like a 60-year-old woman who has not been very active throughout her lifespan, physical activity for her may be getting up multiple times out of a chair and doing guided resistance training exercises that way. So we need to have these individuals strength train, but what that strength training looks like is going to be different for every individual. Also, the cool thing, especially when we start getting into our older individuals, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, the biggest thing with strength training is going to be fall prevention. We know that falls are going to have the biggest impact of quality of life. Usually once an individual has broken a hip, we tend to see an increase, or other major falls, we tend to see an increase in mortality 6 and 2 years after that fall. Sorry, 6 months and 2 years after that fall. So basically, we want to prevent falls because once they do happen, individuals tend to die very quickly afterwards. Also, when you do strength training, you're going to improve your mobility and your quality of life. These individuals can do things like carry groceries up a flight of stairs, get up and take care of their household chores by themselves, bathe themselves. As we get older, those are going to be very important. Strength training is going to be great to do this. We're also not going to see these big losses in muscle fiber types and muscle fiber loss. And we tend to maintain more favorable body compositions with strength training. However, you can't do everything with just strength training alone. You need to also have endurance training in the mix. So endurance training exercises are going to kind of help mitigate the declines in cardiovascular functioning that we see with age. So for example, if you participate in endurance exercises, you're going to slow the decline of your cardiac output, your stroke volume, and try to maintain a favorable submaximal and maximal heart rate. This is going to help us with mitigating the declines in VO2, and now we actually have the energy and capacity to do longer periods of work. Also, we can maintain our respiratory functioning. Individuals can breathe better for longer periods of time. Now, how much we can mitigate this loss through endurance training is going to be on a couple of different things. So first and foremost is going to be genetics. I can't really fix genetics. So other things, though, that I can work on are my activity levels, the intensity and volume in which an individual trains, working to fix that body composition, because remember, our strength training can help with body composition, endurance training can further help develop body composition. And then finally, the age range. So I wouldn't expect the same levels of endurance activity out of a 50-year-old as I would an 80-year-old. So I can expect both of them to be active and participate, but I'm going to have very different levels of physical activity, volume, and intensity. And then finally, we know with age that lactate threshold is going to decline, but we can slow this a little bit with physical activity. But I do need to be careful when I do my strength training and endurance training with my older individuals because of two things. The first is older individuals have very limited thermoregulation. This means that they can overheat very quickly and they don't tolerate cold very well. So I need to be very careful on how I train these individuals, making sure that I give them adequate rest periods, adequate access to water, and if we're training in the cold, making sure they're well layered and bundled up. And then finally, we know our individuals that are older are going to have an increased risk of injury. So even though it is very beneficial for them to do strength training and endurance training to mitigate some age-related losses, the risk of them injuring themselves are pretty high. They could fall. Tendon injuries are much more likely, sprains and strains, because we've lost some elastian function, so things are much more likely to tear and pop. And also we know they're already having issues with mobility, so limited range of motion tends to lead to more injuries. So I hope this is kind of a nice summary of exercise and aging, and I look forward to hearing back from you guys on chapter 19. Thanks. Bye.